you may be, however you may be listening, thank you for giving us just a few minutes of your time. Today, we are continuing the retro movie reviews for the horror movies for the month of October, and joining me is a good Canadian kid, my friend from north of the border, Mr. Jabroni Jabber Podcast. How's it going, buddy?
It's going good, and Mr. Jabber is my father, but I'm happy to be here anyway.
Just trying to show some respect to our friends north of the border. There's so few Canadians up there to respect anymore. It kind of goes downhill once you get past Trudeau.
Yeah. We don't set the bar very high, as shown by our leader.
But getting off on the politics, as we'll be doing that for the live election show here in a couple weeks, we are going to be talking about the horror classic, probably one of the movies that started the horror genre becoming the great thing that it once was, Friday the 13th. And the plot is, in 1957 at Camp Crystal Lake, young Jason Voorhees drowned. In 1958, 2 camp counselors were murdered. In 1962, fires in bad water thwarted the camp's reopening. Now, in 1980, Steve Christie finally reopens Camp Crystal Lake with the help of a few new counselors, ignoring the warnings of a crazy old man. The murderers start up again while a mysterious stalker prowls the area. Is the killer seeking revenge? Who will survive the nightmare and live to tell the story? Directed by Sean S. Cunningham, the film was a huge financial success for Paramount Pictures, grossing almost $60 million against a $550,000 budget. To put that in 2020 money, that is like making $190 million on a $1.75 million budget, which is really, really successful, especially considering that Friday the 13th was an independent film. So for an independent film to do that today, highly successful. On Rotten Tomatoes, Friday the 13th holds a 64% approval rating based on 55 reviews, with an average rating of 5.58 out of 10. With a consensus reading, rather quaint by today's standards, Friday the 13th still has its share of bloody surprises and a 70s holdover aesthetic to slightly compel. The cast of essentially nobodies at the time consisted of Adrienne King as Alice, Harry Crosby as Bill, Jeannine Taylor as Marcy, Laurie Bartram as Brenda, a young Kevin Bacon as Jack in one of his first roles, Mark Nelson as Ned, Robbi Morgan as Annie, Peter Brouwer as Steve Christie, and Ari Lehman as the young Jason who gets about 4 seconds of screen time right at the end. Now, one of the things that I had said when me and my friend Jeremy sat down and did the retro movie review for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is I love the almost hazy, gritty visual aesthetic of these old 70s and early 80s horror movies. This thing has that too. It's very it makes the entire situation look much more ominous.
Oh, I agree with you, and I like even the way the titles were done in these old horror films, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, for example. Based in 2020, you hear that title and you're thinking there is going to be some blood and gore. It's really not that. And then even this Friday the 13th, and you look at the title, oh, what is this movie all about? And kind of like the way you mentioned, the way it's shot at the beginning and everything. A lot of off-screen kills, as we'll get into later, and lots of, it's what made, as you mentioned, this is one of the first slasher movies, albeit Friday the 13th was a little earlier, and not Friday the 13th, Halloween was a little earlier and stuff, but this really kicked off what would be, for me, the best decade of horror was the 80s, and this was the first big horror movie that I can recall, especially in the slasher subgenre of the 1980s.
Also, a lot of the tropes that became normal in slasher films were really established by this film. That the way that music was used in this film was something that was used in a lot of horror films, even now. You know, the sound design and all that, the set designs, the tropes that went on throughout the 80s and into the 90s of all this being about a bunch of teenage kids who are being rambunctious and into drugs and sex, all being the ones that are the victims for all this crazy stuff. It's all these things that became the style of horror filmmaking all were birthed primarily from this film. And it even did some things differently. Actually, you mentioned Halloween a minute ago. The director, Sean S. Cunningham, he actually said in an interview many years later that he actually made this to feed off the popularity of the film Halloween, which came out, 3 years earlier? 77?
78.
So it came out, 2 years earlier. He said he made this to feed off that popularity of that film. And he ended up, honestly, he said he just made this movie as a way to make some money. that he didn't anticipate it. He didn't anticipate a sequel. He didn't anticipate even really getting any more work in movies after this. He just made this movie just to make a movie and hopefully make a couple of bucks. And it became, I think a lot of people would say, and it'd be hard to argue against it, kind of the horror franchise of the entire genre.
Yeah, it's definitely that or Halloween. I mean, there's what, 11 or 12 films if you include, I think, the reboot in 2009 or the remake. But I mean, for me, this movie is definitely the best, I think, of all the Fridays. And I know that's a hot take, if you will, because it doesn't have Jason. It's his mother. But I think Betsy Palmer is just unbelievable in this film.
Yeah, I had read something that this was the first film she had done since 1959. Or something like that, or something like that. She had not done a film in a very, very long time, and she actually was at first not very into doing this film because of obviously the grotesque nature. It wasn't the kind of thing she was used to doing, and when she was in the middle of doing all her stuff, the prime of her acting career, there wasn't really a lot of horror going around. I mean, Nosferatu was about as bad as it got at that point, and that was 1929 or whatever it was. But yeah, and to top it off, her being a classically trained actress, she did a lot of theater and stuff like that before moving to the big screen. She was really terrifying in her little. You don't really see her until really about halfway through the third act when things are really winding up. She doesn't even show her face on camera, and as soon as she comes on camera, she just kind of takes over the entire thing, which is fantastic. Which is kind of what you want the killer to do.
Yeah, exactly. I like that's why I mentioned earlier, that's why I really like this film is most of and I mean, it's weird to talk about, but it is a horror movie, so the kills are kind of the important thing of the movie. Most of the kills are off screen at the beginning, even the early scenes when the Jeep is driving and whatnot, and I believe it's Alice who becomes the final girl is riding in the Jeep talking to someone, and you don't see who she's talking to. And it just adds to the suspense and how great the film is. Because like you said, it's not till almost the third act till you actually see someone. And then when you see her, she looks like, that's just an old grandma or a mother. She doesn't look very intimidating. And then you put it all together and it makes it even a little more terrifying that it's like, wow, this could be your grandma that just snapped and killed a bunch of people.
I read something while I was doing some research on this, because she came up with a theater background, that when you actually go to strike somebody in the theater, they are taught to actually slap somebody. And so they had to actually train her while she was on set to not actually hit the actress, because towards the end of the movie when she shows up and she's slapping that girl around in the cabin, they actually had to train her in the movie way of doing that thing, how to fake it, how they use camera angles to make it look real and stuff like that. Because I guess when they first went to shoot that scene, she actually reached out and slapped that blonde girl and she wasn't expecting it at all. So they were like, oh, wait a minute, yeah, this was a different way of doing things here in the movie world. But yeah, I mean, it's a young Kevin Bacon, and a lot of these actors never really went on to big things except for him. But still, it's just one of those weird ways that talent and story and everything kind of comes together with all these things that kind of makes this a timeless movie. I think this was rated as number 2 all time on the AFI horror movies. I forget what was number 1, but yeah, I mean
probably Psycho.
Maybe Psycho. It could even have been Halloween. I know. Usually those are the 3 movies that come up when you start talking about top 5 horror films. But yeah, I mean, this movie is just amazing. It's kind of tepid by today's standards, but like I said, I think there's something aesthetic about this movie when you're watching it. You do feel more connected to this movie than you feel to things like Scream or some of this crap that just came out recently. Although Blumhouse is putting out some really, really good horror movies, and they're doing a great job kind of reinvigorating the horror genre, I still think this 70s and 80s kind of feel does a lot more to visually just kind of draw you in.
Yeah, there's something to be. This, to me, like I said, is definitely the glory era, this 1978 to 1985. Although, I think Scream, I do think gets a bad rap because of the sequels. I think if it was a one-off, just the first movie, the first movie's a great movie, I think. Maybe it was because I was 7 when I first watched it. It's probably my favorite horror movie, but just like anything in horror, this movie too. Great first movie, and I mean some of the sequels are good too, but I think this is the best one. And then, like anything in horror, we can't leave well enough alone, and we just go, go, go. Like, look at this one. Like, Jason Goes to Space and all that stuff. And, like, the Nightmare on Elm Street movies just got ridiculous, too. And
yeah, I think this genre got taken over by all these people who are like, oh, wait a minute, this movie made how much money? Well, if we pour a bigger budget onto the next movie, maybe we can make that much more money. And it became more Hollywood intrusion rather than people just trying to be creative. I mean, look, there's a reason why a lot of these independent films end up becoming super timeless, have low budgets, because you have to concentrate on story and character and dialogue. You can't depend on the crutches that are special effects or just big name actors and things like that. I think that's one of the reasons why these movies last the way they do. But, the director, Sean Cunningham, he actually had a little bit of success after this. He went on to direct one of the 80s teen sex comedy movies called Spring Break. He also directed and produced that movie and the movie Deep Star 6. I don't know if you remember that movie. I think it was early 90s. It was about the time things like The Abyss and stuff like that were coming out. It was one of those underwater horror kind of things.
Okay. I believe I've seen Spring Break, unless I'm confusing that with Summer Camp or Summer Sky. I don't know. There's so many movies in the 80s.
The 80s, there were so many movies like that came out that it was easy to get them all mixed up. But I looking at the poster as I was looking at it, I did remember seeing the film, but it was probably back in the 80s at some point. But he also went on to direct a couple more horror movies that are actually pretty critically acclaimed. Did you ever see the House movies? House 1 and House 2? And I think there was a third one that came out sometime in the, I want to say, mid-90s that I don't think did as well. But he directed those. He produced those movies, and those are pretty loved by horror fans. Not only that, but he did 4 other Friday the 13th films, and did the Friday the 13th video game that came out just a few years ago. So so this has been kind of, at many points, this has been kind of his baby. He's really kind of shepherded this whole thing forward. Not bad for a guy that didn't expect this movie to do more than make him a few bucks to pay the bills and.
Yeah, it's great. I like how he was. Well, it's crazy to think that he produced The Last House on the Left in both the 1972 and then the 2009.
He was also a producer on the newer version of Friday the 13th that came out in 2009, I believe.
Yeah, I before, Frank, I was going to ask you. See, Nick, who I do my show with, is a big Friday the 13th fan as well. And he did not like the 2009 remake. And let me preface by saying, I did not like it at first either. But I rewatched it in the last 6 months, and I actually quite enjoy. I think it's one of the better movies of that late 2000s, early 2010s, where they were remaking everything. I think it was one of the better ones, and I thought that they would definitely get a sequel, but it never did, which was surprising.
Did Blumhouse make that movie?
Let me see. Blumhouse. I'm not sure. Production was New Line Cinema, Paramount, Platinum Dunes, directed by Marcus Nispel. Oh, wow, that's shocking that I was actually liked it with Michael Bay. Was one of the producers. I am not a Michael Bay fan at all.
Well, producing doesn't always mean you had anything to do with making the movie, but that's kind of another story for another time.
Yeah.
But one of the other people that you reminded me that we should talk about is Tom Savini, who is, everybody's seen his face and knows him, but if I just say his name, you wouldn't know it. He's one of the he's had acting gigs in From Dusk Till Dawn and in the Machete movies with the guy whose name I'm drawing a blank on. Why am I drawing a blank on the guy's name? He's one of the coolest Mexicans ever lived. But,
Danny Trejo.
Yeah, Danny Trejo. I don't know why I missed out on his name. But so this is a guy that you've seen a lot, but he has actually got a long history of doing makeup and special effects stuff in Hollywood. He's done several of the Friday the 13th movies. He did The Day of the Dead, and he also worked on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. So, I mean, this is a guy who has just been around Hollywood for a long time. He's also been a stunt coordinator at times. He's done a lot of other makeups and special effects for different things. I know he's worked on some of the anthology horror stuff that was on TV. About the time that American Horror Story was starting to get popular, he worked on stuff like the Tales from the Crypt TV series and things like that.
Yeah, I love him as a makeup artist / special effects person, because and I think that's another reason why I like these 70s and 80s horror movies, because the special effects were practical. It didn't get outrageous with the CGI and stuff like we see now. Like, for example, in this film, I mentioned it before air, but probably easily my top five favorite kills in a horror movie is when Kevin Bacon's character, everybody remembers that it's an iconic death, gets the arrow gets stabbed with an arrow while he's laying in bed just after he had sex, and he's smoking a joint. Sex and drugs, guys, that's 2 no-nos in a horror movie. But, I mean, it's impractical because why would she squeeze herself under the bed? But, hey, don't think it's a horror movie. And it's awesome. And then when you hear after that, what was it? Something to do with something screwed up with the doll and everything. So it was someone blowing air into the...
Oh, it's Tom Savini. Yeah, I read about this.
Yeah, he had to blow the air in it to make it actually look right because something screwed up. And it's just like, see, that adds to the nostalgia and the cool, not, we're just going to do it on a computer.
Yeah,
like sometimes that less is
bubble,
more, people.
That air stuff that came out towards the end of what you see in the scene was because he had to use his lungs to blow it through there, and they actually liked the shot, so they kept it in there. I was actually just reading about that. But, getting to some of the trivia, some of the other stuff. The movie was filmed at Camp No-Be-No-Sco in New Jersey. The camp is still in operation and has a wall of Friday the 13th memorabilia to honor that the movie was set there.
That's cool.
I wonder, I'm going to have to look this place up online just to kind of get a glimpse as to what it looks like. I think there's a Crystal Lake in almost every state. Is there a Crystal Lake near you?
No, I haven't heard of one, but I have heard that running joke that there's Crystal Lakes everywhere.
There is no joke a place called Crystal Lake that is about 40 minutes north of me. And I've never actually been there. I know some people that have been fishing there. I don't know if there's any camps there or not. But every time I drive far enough north to where I see the signs that point to where Crystal Lake is, I always kind of giggle to myself inside because I think it'd be kind of cool. Another thing I looked at is the scene with the snake was not in the script and was an idea from Tom Savini after an experience in his own cabin during filming. The snake in the scene was real, including its on-screen death.
Yeah, that part I'm not cool with. I've heard that before. That's one of the things of the movie I don't like. I'm not for killing live animals on film. Not a fan. But
me neither. I'm not going to go full PETA or anything. But again, it was 1980. I think they filmed the movie over the course of 28 days in early 1980. So
and it was an independent, low budget film. So.
And it was. I think they could have afforded a rubber snake, but whatever. I mean, I think it worked out great in the movie.
Yeah.
Gene Siskel, the widely heralded late great Gene Siskel, hated this movie so much that he gave away the ending in his review. He and Roger Ebert also slammed it in a special edition of Siskel and Ebert called The War on Women, which focused on misogynistic slasher movies. All of this just boosted their ticket sales. That makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's like it's not just this generation people. Even the people of the late 80s are like, wait a minute, you're going to tell me not to watch something? Well, I'm definitely watching it now.
That's human nature. It's like, wait a minute, you're telling me not to do something? Now I'm more curious.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it goes to show even back in 1980 when you tried to be woke, it just kind of didn't work out for you very well.
Yeah.
Around the 19-minute mark, special effects supervisor Tom Savini performed the arrow shot that narrowly missed the character Brenda when she was setting up the archery target.
Yeah, that's crazy to think that they were actually shooting live arrow.
Well, I mean, it's 1980. Yeah. Whatever. I mean, I'm sure there probably was some quick cuts you could have done to make that effect happen. But whatever. If she was willing to stand there and get an arrow shot at a target that was a foot in front of her.
Yeah, that's.
All I'm saying is I hope she got an extra couple of bucks on her movie check.
I would hope so.
The film is rumored to have been inspired by the real-life Lake Bodom murders of Espoo, Finland, on June 5th of 1960. I have not looked up these murders to see how they compared to what we ended up getting in this film, but it is mind-boggling to me that something as crazy and outlandish and terrifying as the events that are depicted in this film were based on something that happened in real life.
It's sometimes, like they say, real life is better than fiction.
Scarier than fiction.
Scarier than fiction. Sorry, yeah.
I'm gonna have to look this up and see exactly how close that is. I kind of caught that little bit of information right as I was getting ready to sit down and start filming, so I didn't have a chance to look it up. But that's pretty interesting. The next thing is there is actually a connection to this movie to a legendary Hollywood star. Harry Crosby, who plays Bill in the movie, is the son of Bing Crosby.
Huh.
Can you imagine, like, Bing Crosby, nice clean cut, Bing Crosby singing and dancing around all his movies? His son is in a slasher film.
That's awesome.
It's one of those things where, wow, the apple has fallen far from the tree.
Yeah, I see he was only in 2 films. This movie in 1980 and then a TV movie in 1981 called The Private History of a Campaign That Failed. And then then all his other stuff on television was all TV specials with his dad. And then he was on a pilot episode of a show called Riding for the Pony Express and then an episode of Double Trouble in 84, and that was it.
I hope this movie didn't kill his career, because you figure having some name recognition, especially being the son of Bing Crosby, you would probably have a chance to at least get some kind of decent work in Hollywood.
You'd think, and it says here that he went to the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art.
Wow.
That sounds fancy.
Your name's Bing Crosby. You're Bing Crosby's kid. You carry his last name, and you went to that school? Kind of surprised he'd end up having a bigger career, but, whatever. Maybe he just went a different path. But, okay, so final thoughts on the movie. What do you think?
Oh, I think it is easily, like you'd mentioned, to me, it's one of the greatest slasher films of all time, one of the greatest horror movies of all time, and I know a lot of people do not like the original as much as all the sequels because they're more partial. Everyone thinks look at the Scream movie, for example. How at the beginning of that movie when Drew Barrymore's character so cocky when he asks her who's the killer in Friday the 13th, and she immediately, it's Jason. Everybody knows that. And that's why I appreciate this movie more, because everyone relates Friday the 13th to Jason. Yes, he's the reason that all this events happened, but he's not the killer in the first movie. It's Mrs. Voorhees. And that's why I enjoy this movie, because it's different. It's something that maybe you could see happen. A mother just snaps and loses her mind because her son drowned because the camp counselors were having sex and didn't see him drowning. And I really appreciate, and then, like, it sounds like I'm bagging on all the sequels. I'm not. Some of them were good, some of them were bad. It's like any sequel or any long series, but this one for me, just like you had mentioned, how the way it's shot, and it's just so simple and so effective, and just the scene, for those of you who haven't seen it, when Mrs. Voorhees gets her head chopped off, she does this great thing with her hands where she lifts them up, like the "why me, oh God" thing, as her hands.
I noticed that too as I was watching it just a little bit ago. I thought
as her
hands came up, and she was just kind of like, with her, like, her fists in the air or something like that.
She's got them wide open. Cool it's look. Like, oh, that's a great shot, and yeah, it's one of the best horror movies ever, and I don't know much more that I can say. I love it, and I love like you had mentioned, the music, the kill, but just great, and the way it ends with a jump scare and shoots back to the jump scare wasn't real, and just mind fucking at the end of the movie. It's just so well done.
Yeah, I think there's a reason why modern day horror movies draw off this movie. It's so honest and so real. It was one of the first movies that made a wholesome person the killer. It's like you're so used to seeing the killer being that guy who's like 6'7", 250, muscular, ominous, walking through the woods, always catching up to the people who are running. It became it became over time such a weird trope. But every time since then that you've made that really unassuming person the killer, it's just so great, because I think it hits closer to home when you make it like that. And to have this franchise start like that, I think is a big part of the reason why it's resonated so much. And then on top of that, of course, you've had, just the advances in special effects that have come since then. Really makes you appreciate the practical effects that are used in movies from this time. And on top of that, it's a fun watch. And the fact that things got more gruesome over time, I think makes you more respect the subtle horror, the subtle gore of somebody actually being murdered. I don't know if anybody out there watching has ever seen, like, actual crime scene photos. They're not usually, well, generally speaking, I mean, depending on the crime, of course, they're not as gory as they tend to be depicted on screen. A lot of that is just done for flash. But the fact that it's so subtle, like the first guy that dies in the movie gets stabbed in the belly and all you see is blood coming from his belly. It's not like an explosion of intestines and all that. It's so much more subtle. And I think that's one of the things that kind of gets into your psyche a little bit as you watch this movie, is that it's, because it's so subtle, it's disturbing. I'm not going to lie. I felt the need to get up and get my 9mm and put it on my hip as I was sitting here alone watching this movie in my house a couple hours ago. Because there was just that one little thing. I was like, is somebody out there? Because my front door was open and I was watching TV. And I was like, maybe I should go get the 9mm just in case Mrs. Voorhees decides to come in and start some shit. But, yeah, I mean, there's a reason why this is always in the top probably 3 whenever you talk about best horror movies. There are so many lists of greatest movies ever that have this and a couple of the horror movies in their top 10. And like I said, I think it's just because there is this weird amalgamation of talent, writing, directing, story. When you get those things to all fall into the perfect place, you get something that is just flat out amazing. And you can do it for $550,000.
Yeah, it's just crazy. And I just want to put over how great Betsy Palmer was in this. Like the scenes where she's talking as Jason. Kill him, mommy, kill him. Like, it's just so good. And even as you had mentioned, what makes it even scarier is the fact, like, it could happen. A good person could snap. And there's times where she's even showing Pamela herself who she was before Jason died, and then in the same scene, she'll just snap back into the crazy killer. And it's just like, wow, this is just... Like, I don't think Mrs. Voorhees gets... Like, whenever we talk about killers in slasher movies, we talk Leatherface and Jason and Freddy and the Ghostface killer, even, who's 18 different people are the Ghostface killer, and Michael Myers and everything. But nobody ever talks about Pamela Voorhees, and she is absolutely phenomenal.
And played beautifully. Again, you can see just the skill that she has as an actress in just that last 15 minutes of film. She is just amazing. But we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Tell us what you got going on. You've got a live stream coming up tonight. What are you guys going to be talking about?
Oh, we're going to be talking about, as you can see in our great thumbnail, it'll be out by the time you watch this, that was done by yours truly. It is Donald Trump knocking out the COVID virus, because Donald Trump has beat COVID, so we'll discuss that. Also, my co-host's son was sent home from school for 10 days because he had a runny nose. So we'll get into that. We'll be talking about Dak Prescott and his broken leg and what's going to happen with the Cowboys, and also all these people being pissed off at Bill Burr for his monologue on SNL over the weekend, where he made fun of white women right in front of a group full of white women. And shockingly, the white women were highly offended. So we'll get into all of that.
Stop being so pissed off, people. Just go see a movie. You can find the link to the Jabroni Jabber Podcast in the description down below of all my videos. I highly suggest going and checking him out live every Thursday and everything else that he does. You can also see him quite often on the Derailed Podcast with me and Gatekeeper Drew most of the time. The link to all that stuff is in the description below. I want to thank you, my good Canadian friend, for joining me. That is all for now. Thanks for checking us out. We'll check you guys later.